girls, we're going to continue reading Seeds Behind Trees. We're starting in the middle of chapter 4, and we are on page 37. Please stay with me. Okay, we are going to continue with Greyfire, and he's retelling a pretty critical story. I believe that I could go as far away as I wanted, Greyfire continued after a thoughtful pause, to as strange and distant a place as I could find, and that I could still get back safely before it got dark. And could you? I was caught up with the idea that would be a wonderful to go anywhere and yet return home when you needed. No, Greyfire said. There are some places that are too beautiful. You want to be a part of them, and then they trap your heart. Where? To be a part of a place within it, like a purple flower in a summer meadow, like a grain of sand enclosed by a smoky tan gate. What's a gate, boys and girls?
It is a texture.
Well, a type of what?
Rock.
Yes, a type of rock. A place where you wouldn't have to see to be. I listened with every skill I had learned, because wherever it was, that was where I wanted to go. I can't tell you exactly. It was an early afternoon. Many years ago, I had been on a hunting trip with my sister, and we became separated. And that's when I discovered it. Without any plan as to where I was going, I stumbled out of the woods and down a winding, steep path into a land of water. There was amazement in Greyfire's voice, as if he were in that place again, just as if he had seen it for the first time. Water? I prompted him to go on. Everywhere I looked, water pouring down from streams in every direction into one great river that led into a lake so wide and long, I couldn't see the end of it. I think it stretched all the way to the sea, where the water met rocks. Mist rose to greet the rain that was falling, and the sky was like the surface of a still pond, and reflected back everything that was below. I tried to imagine such a scene. Well, what did it sound like? Like a storm, like the tide turned into the wind, or like the sizzle and snap of a great fire, like all the noises you've ever heard, except louder and squeezed together. And I was in the middle. I could almost hear the place. I noticed that Greyfire had closed his eyes tightly to see it. And the colors, Greyfire went on. It was as though someone had thrown a rock into a rainbow, and all the pieces were broken up and mixed together, brighter than ever before. Standing there was something like staring into the face of the sun without having to quickly look away. And the longer I remained watching, the more the shades changed. The sky dimmed, yet the colors seemed to become brighter. Go on, I begged him when he paused. People never talked so clearly about what they saw. Listening to him was like smelling hot soup on a cold evening. What is that, boys and girls? What kind of figurative language? Listening to him was like smelling hot soup. How do we know that's a simile?
Like grass.
Good. Isn't that such a cool simile? Listening to him was like smelling hot soup on. You know when you come in, you're freezing cold, and you know that hot soup is waiting for you. It was like being in a dream. As the hours passed, I knew I could return to the woods and find my sister. You must have wanted to show her that place, I suggested. Greyfire brought his large hands up to his face, pressed his fingers against his cheeks. Well, that's the shameful thing, he said at last. I didn't want anyone else to know about it. I wanted it all for myself. In fact, you are the first person I've ever told. Me? I was shocked. Why me? Greyfire held up his hand. Hear the story first. As I was saying, the land of water only became more wonderful as the sun traveled to the west. My feet were heavy with wanting to stay. I envied the trees, rooted there, belonging there, compared to what lay before me. Everything else I had ever seen was made of dust. Where does a runner run when he has arrived at the only finish line he doesn't want to cross? This was a question for which I had no answer. To not want more, to be so satisfied with what you did, that you didn't want to move, you didn't want to be surprised at what had happened next, you didn't want to hear a new story, to learn a new song, wish a new wish, you didn't want more. To me, that was like being a rock or a stick frozen in the ice of a pond. It was awful. I think I understand what you mean about a place being too beautiful, I said. Gray Fire laughed softly to himself. Nothing, is it okay?
Yep.
Is more dangerous, he agreed. Night was coming quickly, and I realized that I should try to find my sister. I knew that, but I told myself that at the last minute, I could race the night and win. What does he mean by that? He could race the night and win. You know, when you keep wanting to do something, you're watching the sun setting and you're like, I can get home and still have a little bit of daylight before the sun, what?
Goes down.
Yeah, before the sun completely sets, right? So that's what he's thinking. I have a little bit more time to enjoy this. I have a little bit more time. I have a little bit more time, right? So he's racing the what?
The sun.
The sun, right? He's racing against time, really. So what stopped you? Greyfire put his hand upon my shoulder. His skin was dry and feathery as an abandoned wasp's nest, but there was a bony strength in his fingers that pulled me into his memory. The moon. Suddenly the sky above me cleared, and the largest moon I'd ever seen looked down. Against the blackness of the sky, it was the color of a robin's breast. And then I looked down, following its light, to the pool where the water was most calm. The moon floated there too. Did the moon really float on the water?
No.
The moon's what?
Shadow.
The moon, what do we call that? It's not the moon's
Reflection.
shadow, the moon's
Reflection.
beautiful. And it shone almost in the midst of the air. Each drop contained a tiny orange moon. Can words show you something you've never seen? Listening to Gray Fire was like watching him take a stick of charcoal and draw a picture on a flat piece of limestone. With each stroke, the image became more and more complete. I was afraid if I said the wrong thing, Gray Fire might stop talking, and this vision of sights I had only pretended to know about would blow away. The moon, when people described it, they always said it was round as a dark circle of a person's eye. But to me, even at its brightest, the moon was just a white smear in the night sky. Everything that was far away from where I stood was either invisible or blended together like many shades of clay, like the swirl of leaves that still remain high on the branches of a maple tree at this time of year. Once they fell to the ground and were close enough for me to touch, I could tell the differences between them, divide them into orange and purple and red and yellow. Maybe the moon was like that too. A thing you could understand once you were near enough. The moon on the pool was so huge, Greyfire went on, that it seemed to be right in front of me, the entrance to an enormous cave of light. It glittered like a flint, and I wanted to see what lay within. I took a step, another, to the end of the path. My feet sunk into the cold water, and then my legs. And before I paid much attention to the stream was about my waist, and it was pushing at me and holding me at the same time. But I was almost there, and I reached my arm out, and I put my hand through the moon. I nodded. It was just as I expected. Shapes changed close up, and they tightened into themselves. And as he spoke, Greyfire lifted his other arm, stretched his hand forward, then suddenly spread his fingers wide and shook them, breaking the sunshine into flashing patterns. The moon shattered into waves. I had come too near, and before I could return, the clouds so crowded the sky that I could not even see the stars. The rain returned as well, and the night had beaten me before I had taken my first running step. And that was not the worst thing. Was it the cold? Greyfire looked at me. My foot had slipped between two curved rocks. It had been swallowed by the spirit of the place. Oh, I felt a chill, as if an icy wind had blown through my body. I drew my cloak closer around my shoulders. Well, what did you do? Though I had pulled as hard as I could, though I had ducked underwater, I had used my hands, I had pushed and I had twisted until I felt the skin of my ankle tear. I could not get free. My two smallest toes were wedged in too tightly. And then the water rose as if a tide were rolling in from the sea. It lapped against my knees. It washed onto my stomach and it passed my ribs. And when it reached my shoulders, I realized I had no choice. No choice about what? Greyfire's fingers gripped my shoulders like the claws of a bird preparing to fly. When I was about to give up, to give in, I heard my sister, Otter, call me from very far away. Greyfire said. She sounded irritated, annoyed that I had disappeared, but soon her cries became so unhappy, so full of grief that I knew I couldn't remain there. I couldn't leave her alone. I slipped the bone knife from my belt. I held my breath. I ducked underwater, and with one hand, I steadied my pinned leg, and with the other, I cut off my toes that were pinned. In shock, my eyes darted to Greyfire's feet, crossed beneath his knees. It occurred to me that I had never seen him without his moccasins. The pain was terrible. Even the coldness of the water did not help. I cried out. I used all the weight as leverage, and the rocks released me. I backed into the darkness. I felt the mud harden as the water became more shallow. I must have pulled myself up on the bank, still wailing, and then scrambled, half dragged myself back into the woods. I must have left a trail of blood, but the rain washed it away. I myself tried to search for it. The daylight finally collapsed, slept there where I dropped my head full of water and moons and colors. And the next thing I knew, Otter was beside me, wrapping my damaged foot in a poultice made of leaves. I searched for you all night, my sister scolded as she worked over me. Didn't you hear me call? I must have passed near this place 100 times. I was somewhere else, Otter says, I told her. I was inside of Beauty. Don't talk nonsense. Where could you go? What animal attacked you? She thought I was confused by my wound, and so didn't take my answer seriously, and she never has. I didn't explain to her or to anyone, yet since that night, my every limping step has reminded me that I want to go back, and I want to look for what I left in the land of that water. For your missing toes? I said in sympathy. Greyfire shook his head. Now his fingers pinched like two halves of a clamshell, then released me. For my heart. We sat for a moment, without words. A wind rustled the dry leaves that still remained, attached to the branches of the tree behind Greyfire's house, and some of them wafted down, brushing upon the mats of his roof. The air smelled damp, frosty, cold against my cheek. I tried to think of the secret story of mine that I could tell to Greyfire, something to balance the value of what he had shared with me, but nothing I'd done seemed important enough, mysterious enough, or interesting enough. That's good, Greyfire nodded in approval. You understand about listening. You are not afraid of the quiet. Have you gone back? Is it still as beautiful? I dream of it every night, Greyfire said. It's the only dream I have. I've tried to find my way there, tried and tried. I've crisscrossed the woods, attempted to make the mistakes I've made. And when I become lost, that first time, in my wanderings, I have made many odd things. I've seen many odd things, birds with huge beaks, a cave that glows, but never the land of water. Gray Fire hung his head. I know it can't be far. It took us only 2 days to return to the village once Otter rescued me. But ever since then, he paused and waited for the right words, and when he spoke again, there was sorrow in his tone. It's a hush, though, that it's disappeared into my memory. Gray Fire seemed to turn on himself, to a journey, to a place I couldn't follow. So I pressed my fists together and said the polite thing, the words my parents had taught me to use on such an occasion. Thank you for the gift of your story. Gray Fire shook his head. He sat up straighter. He tapped one long bony finger on the ground between us, and he drew a circle in the dirt. It's not a gift, it's an invitation. For what? Why? To join me. Because, Gray Fire rested his hands back to his knees, because you are seas behind trees. Me? You mean I could come with you? Leave the village? You take me to the secret place, just the two of us, men. I couldn't move, so I was excited at the idea. No, I knew it was too good to be possible. You will take me. Perhaps with your skill, you can find the land of water. I don't think so, I said uncertainly. If I was lucky with my skill, I could hear footsteps coming. I could guess where to look for a sticky needle. But what Gray Fire was asking was too much. I was not ready, not quite. Stay still for a second, Cam. Say yes, Gray Fire urged. Say yes. No one had ever made a request to me with such a need in his voice. It made me feel scared and important at the same time. Sometimes, the wearer once had said when she gave me the name, the people need someone to do the impossible, someone with the ability to see what can't be seen. I stared at the circle Gray Fire had made. The moon, he said, was just as round. I opened my fist. I knelt forward and pressed my palm into the center, leaving the print of my hand like a promise in the soft earth. I'll try.